We welcome you to this Sunday here at Unity Monroe. Those of you who are watching, whenever you're watching, welcome to the Sunday of April 19th when we're videotaping this and putting it on YouTube. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate those of you who could be here this day. You all know the expression that, before you would ever kind of criticize somebody, you do something, you do what? You walk a mile in their shoes. Of course, we would never criticize anybody, right? But you walk a mile in their shoes. Now, why is that an expression? Well, because it says it's kind of metaphorical for finding a place that is within that person, their heart, what their soul feels like. When we walk in their shoes, we understand a little bit more of their consciousness. Perhaps we understand what makes them tick. So there's that phrase, walk a mile in their shoes. And this is the most important part of it, my friends. This is the most important rule when you walk a mile in somebody's shoes. Then, if you choose to criticize them, you'll be a mile away and you'll have your shoes. Of course, we'd never do that, right? When we think about the idea that's, I think, one of the most important and pressing things in our life, in this particular time especially, or in just our interpersonal relationships, it is finding that common ground. Where is common ground for us? It's in consciousness, it's in heart, it's in soul. Common ground, finding that mystical connection that we have, no matter how we feel about that person or how we think in terms of life itself. The middle-aged mystic and poet Rumi said this. Oops, I hit too many buttons. He said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field, and I'll meet you there. Now, is he talking about an actual field we go to? Perhaps. But when we think of field, we think of the fields of consciousness. We think of that mystical kind of intrigue about how consciousness can connect, how there's a dynamic of connecting in unity, one heart, one consciousness to another. So it's that idea that the field represents states of consciousness, and those states of consciousness move us beyond this dualistic pattern of life. She's different than he's different. She's different than he is. Or life is different in certain ways of how we function through life itself. So we move beyond that dualistic or judgmental temperament or thought pattern. And that's what Rumi is getting at here. We'll meet in the middle at that field, the field of consciousness, the field of awareness, that field of understanding and wisdom. I think that's one of the main themes of Jesus' message when you get right down to it. Jesus was what? As I said in the Daily Word today, it was an inclusive ministry. Jesus didn't shut people out. Jesus didn't say to people, well, because you do this or that, or believe this or that. He invited people in. No matter what they looked like or what they professed, he invited them in. Maybe he wasn't so kind on the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but I'm sure he would have welcomed them in if they would have been a little more hospitable themselves. So that field represents not only states of consciousness, but as I said, the message of Jesus has always been about what? Oneness with God. Oneness, or we might call it the unity of all life and all creation. I think this is such an important message in our day and age, such an important teaching. The message that Jesus taught of oneness, of purposefulness, willingness to see beyond the differences in that field where we are connected, where we're willing to think beyond somebody's pattern of beliefs. We're willing to think beyond our own patterns of belief so that we can meet somebody in that particular field. I think what we're going through right now in our country and our world is this kind of confusion of the mind. I said earlier, it's real easy for us to be brought astray from the message and the meaning of our life, or the path that we are on of ascension to consciousness, of expressing the Christ presence in all things. But when you think about who you are, first and foremost, yes, you are a spiritual being, but we are also human beings. So each and every one of us have the same stuff. I like to call this shell, this outer shell, my earth suit. This is your earth suit. But you have the same blood and bone structure. You have the same kind of skin, all of that. What makes it different then is what goes into consciousness and the pattern of your thoughts and thinking and all of the genetics that goes into that makes you the unique being that you are. But we're all connected in that respect. We're all one as human and divine beings in that connection. So when we look at it from that perspective, we can say, oh, there is a sense of a unity of all life, a purpose for all of life. Now let's go back to, if you will, some biblical stories that I think are important to remember. We're going way back, my friends. We're going Genesis today. And when we look at the story of Genesis, we see some really interesting things. If we know the story of Genesis after the wonderful story, telling, teaching, fable of the flood, we know that Noah's ancestors went on to do something else. And they were connected in this, sense of bringing these stories to life, the wonder of these particular stories. When we look at the study of the Bible itself can mean so many different things. Some people like to look at it, as it is fundamentally, just the writing as it's written, and not interpret that, but everybody does interpret the Bible in their own particular pattern and own particular way. Sometimes we do it metaphorically, sometimes we do it symbolically, allegorically, metaphysically. When Unity and New Thought takes on these traditions of looking at things from a metaphysical perspective, what we're looking at is the recognition that life itself is not just about what you see, all this little stuff of life itself, but life is greater and grander than what we see and observe with our five senses. And that's what we're taking into consideration with a metaphysical understanding. Because when we look at the Bible, whether it's the Old Testament or New, when you look at the stories, when you look at the people, individuals or places, these people and places mean something. Back in the days and even today in that particular part of the world, the names represented something. The names signified something. Your name signifies something. Sometimes we don't care about that or don't even investigate it, but it means something. And metaphysical Bible understanding comes from that because it's about our own states of consciousness and awareness. Metaphysical Bible understanding, wisdom. And so with that tradition in mind, on our spiritual quest, we look at the example in the book of Genesis, in the story of the heirs of Noah going forth, and as it says in the Bible, going on a journey to the east. Now take that into mind, a journey to the east. Now modern biblical scholarship, the last 300 years, has looked at this and indicated that this was not really fleshed out the correct way. It was mistranslated. It wasn't a journey from or to the east. It was a journey from the east. Not a journey to, but from. Now that may seem like just simple semantics, but it means something because it's symbolic. It's metaphysical. The difference between to and from. The east represents what? What would you think the east represents? It signifies. The east represents and signifies those things that are of spiritual nature, of a spiritual bent. We're moving in the direction of our good. To move away from that then would be to move what? To move west. As the story really is fleshed out, they moved west. So they're moving away from what? Their highest good. Their Christ consciousness, their awareness of God and unity and oneness. And this is why we now have the next part of this story. The next part of this story in the passage in Genesis informs us of the Tower of Babel. Pretty interesting how that goes along with that particular part of moving out from the spiritual awareness of the Eastern ideas or information for ourselves. And so the Tower of Babel simply means confusion, a confusion of sound, right? We know that. confusion as the story is told. The outcome of the story, in which language origins of people, of our path became dispersed. People became dispersed according to the tradition of the story. Now, the author of this particular idea and story, tale, we don't know who that person was. We do know, of course, that it's telling a very similar story to other traditions and cultures. And they were talking about humankind in relationship to what they see and observe in their world. This is not something that was written as a first-person voice narrative, if you get what I'm saying with that. It wasn't like somebody writing it down. It was written hundreds, and in this case, probably thousands of years later. How do you explain, thousands of years later, this thing called language over here, different skin color, different traditions? So there's a story told of humankind, the descendants of Noah and others that were trying to, get contact with God. So they build this, whatever that is, thing. They build this thing, and we have this tradition of how this is a constant, understanding or misunderstanding, if you will, about how we are in unity and oneness with all of creation, even though we have this story. As I said, these stories go forth in other traditions as well. You can compare and contrast the mythology of the Blackfeet people, the Blackfoot people, and Old Man, and Old Man was the creator. Old Man was the creator who gave different color water to people to drink. And what happened? They started talking in different languages. They started looking different. And if you go to every culture, from the Greeks to the Romans to the Babylonians to our native lands here, you find these kind of traditions. How do you explain the fact that this person here in this land looks so different than someone else? You explain it through these stories and these wonderful traditions that when you allegorically or symbolically understand them, it lifts you up, it raises you up to find what it means for the depth and in the depth of you. So the sons of Noah going out from the east represents a falling away from our spiritual roots and endowing their goals strictly in a material realm. What does that mean? It means oftentimes we're pulled away from standing tall as a spiritual being, saying, this is what I believe, this is what I own, this is what I understand. Not to say that we confront people, but we just stand tall in our truth, in our wisdom. And so we place our trust within in the Spirit of God. When we place our trust out here or in someone else, which is nothing wrong with that. But again, that always must be filtered through what? Our consciousness. It's colored by the consciousness that we are and what we're becoming. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, in a lot of his writings and speeches and Sunday talks, all of that became compiled in what many of you know, we all know, as the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. And Fillmore said in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, when we think that in the outer or purely mental ways we can comprehend or contact the divine, confusion's always the outcome. Why? Because you got this person saying this and this thing saying that, or showing us this or that. But when we bring it back to source, and we take it within, when we find that place and space of unity and connection with one another, it doesn't matter what other people think or say or believe. We stand tall in our truth, our wisdom. Now, today's lesson, if you saw the weekly update, is based on a poem called The Ballad of East and West. You may be familiar with it, by Rudyard Kipling. And we're probably only familiar with the first line. It says, "Oh, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet." Okay, that we understand that. What makes sense? It talks about, maybe different languages and different cultures, and symbolized in the Tower of Babel story, and many looks and many faiths and traditions. East is east, west is west, and it's hard to intermingle them. But the rest of that particular poem is something I don't think we've become privy to or akin to, or maybe we've read. I don't know. Oh, east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet, till earth and sky stand presently at God's great judgment seat. But there is neither east nor west, border nor breed, nor birth, when two strong men stand face to face, though they come from ends of the earth. Kipling is saying or getting at that point that all of the stuff that we put out as labels and things that are this person and that person, the language, the way they look, that doesn't matter. When two strong souls come together, none of that really matters. All that matters is the oneness and the unity of all life and all of creation. So we might say that yes, the twain shall meet when we understand that when two strong people face each other and do so with dignity and grace and acceptance and wonder, none of that rest of that stuff really matters. Absolutely none of it, because we are now meeting in that particular field. Some of you may be familiar with the work of a wonderful book by Martin Buber called I and Thou. And in the book I and Thou, Martin Buber talks about this two-word pair connection that we have with all of creation. And he calls it the I-it and the I-thou relationship. Now, the I, of course, represents the individual person or soul, or the collective I. And the it, as you can imagine, it being, would be how we connect with other people or other lands. And if we see them as separate from us, if we see them as weird and different and macabre and all of those other things that people may label people or lands or cultures or nations, then it becomes an I-it relationship. You get, that even feels like, it weighs heavy on the heart, that I-it relationship. But sometimes when we prejudge something or someone and say, oh, look at that person, that is an I-it experience. The I-thou experience that Martin Buber and what he's talking about here, the I-thou is simply seeing from that spiritual perspective, raising up and observing that life is in a greater depth than what we just simply see or feel. The I-thou relationship then is one of wholeness and holiness. I may not connect with you from eye to eye or believe what you believe, but I can surely, and we can surely hold an I-thou relationship with someone, no matter where they come from or what they do. Because it is an internal process. It is an internal awareness of our consciousness. So instead of dealing with out here people, situations, places in an I-it relationship, an I-it relationship always sees things and says, Greg, I'm not the problem, they're the problem, right? An I-it relationship always says they should be stopped from what they're doing. They can't be trusted. I remember one of the greatest lessons I learned was the first 2 weeks of ministerial school when this wonderful couple came into the ministry program. They were in my class, and they were great. They were wonderful, especially the man of the couple. He was so good. He got up and he could sing. He was a professional actor from LA. He could deliver a lesson. He could speak. And I didn't like him one bit. I created an I-it relationship because everything that I thought was lacking in me, felt at that particular moment, was what I saw in him. It was a projection. And that projection eventually kind of went by the wayside as I processed all of that stuff. And he and I became very fast friends during the next 2 years, or a little less than 2 years. But in that first initial thing was like, oh boy, I don't like him. Because I projected that out there, all of my lesser parts of myself. that were dying for a healing and eventually became more whole and wholesome, that's what I was projecting on him. And we see that in our world, do we not, this day and age? We see it in our country, we see it in leaders, we see it in ourselves, we see it in family and friends. Unfortunately, so unfortunately, because it leads to that projection. As I said, it's the projecting of our shortcomings, our feeling of our shortcomings. And we need less and less of that and more of the power of creative love, the power of oneness and purpose and unity. So I think there are 4 small kind of steps that we can take in understanding and really holding ourselves to that holy I-thou relationship that Buber talked about, the I-thou relationship. The first of that is simply stop assuming ill motives in others and in ourselves. You know, it's very easy when I see somebody or when we see someone, I just say, oh, I'm going to assign this according to my consciousness about that person because he or she drives this particular car, or they wear these particular clothes, or they come out of that particular house. Stop assuming ill motives in others. Or we say, oh, because this person is walking toward me, maybe they have something else in mind, another intention. Find that healing presence, that healing point in that moment, in that particular field of consciousness. Ask questions, number 2. And I love to ask questions because to me that's the most important and significant part of this. In fact, that where someone says, well, this is what I believe. I said, that's fine. Why do you believe that? Show me where that is proof. I used to have a neighbor way back when I was growing up that even if you showed him the proof in the book, like, look, right here it says that this baseball player hit so many home runs. No, that's not true. It's not true. And nowadays, if it was happening right now, I'd show him on the internet and several different sources. But I had like a baseball almanac or something like that. There it is, right there. Nope. That's misprint. That's a misprint. What are you going to do? The third one is to stay calm in disagreement, which I didn't do a lot for my neighbor because I was like 12 years old. He was a little bit older than I was, quite a bit. But anyway, to stay calm in disagreement. Now, that's not always an easy thing to do, right? But that's where we take a moment just to center ourselves before we ask those questions, before we encounter someone, to stay calm, and then to stand up for ourselves and stand tall for our truth, to make our case, but to do it with generosity and compassion. And I love that whole idea because it reminds me of those wonderful teachings of Jesus as it comes to us and into our lives from the New Testament. Because when he always talked about looking beyond, when he said what? Cast your nets. I always like that. Cast your net sounds like cast a net. Cast your nets on the other side of the boat. Was he talking about dropping anchor on the other side of the boat so you can find better fish? It's about consciousness, friends. Casting your net means look at it from a different perspective. When he said turn the other cheek. When he said go the extra mile with someone. What is he saying? What is he inviting us to do? He's inviting us to live in that I-thou holiness of oneness, harmony, connection, and unity with all of creation. Yeah, east is east and west is west. That's true. But the twain does meet because the very truth and core of our being is that within the warm embrace of love, kindness, support, understanding, and wisdom, there is compassion for our fellow human beings, our fellow travelers. So let's just take a moment to relax now and invite ourselves into that warm embrace of seeing and believing and knowing that, yes, I participate in this unity of all life itself. And I invite you to close your eyes, to find a comfortable spot and place to sit back and relax, and to find comfort in the very breath, the very core of your being as you breathe in this moment. And letting that go and breathing out. And quietly just appreciating and being invigorated by that breath. Breathing in once again and breathing out. I make that wonderful declaration of life and of affirming the goodness and the grace of God that is within, breathing in, breathing out, and sustaining my whole being in this divine moment of peacefulness and serenity. Sustaining my whole being in this moment of quiet and connection. For yes, loving Spirit, I am one with you, one with all of creation. One with all life. Even as I look around or look beyond, I see a connection and a depth with souls in my life, loved ones, challenging individuals. There is a greater depth in that whole and holy relationship and experience than I ever knew before. And so I ask, invite, and know that in these moments, in these times, may I always be aware, and may I always rise up in the holiness and wholeness of a relationship that sees the whole and holiness in all. I see these as opportunities to raise that spiritual vibration, that awareness of my consciousness taking on being an even greater expression of God life and God light. As I affirm and know that I am created in oneness and purpose in God, I extend that hand out to greet others. I see them in that field of understanding where together we create something even greater. Compassion and understanding. So invite yourself right now just simply to breathe in and to let that go and breathe out. Knowing that in this present moment, all that there is a consciousness and an awareness of unity of all creation. I choose this day, loving Spirit, to look beyond what the world has shown me, to look beyond that sense of any separation or duality, and to accept and know that I am part of this creative solution. The creative solution that always brings light and love. I stand for that truth this day, to honor and to respect all others as I honor, respect, and revere who I am. In this moment of quiet and introspection, I bring to the plate and to the table any hurtful, difficult experiences or relationships or challenges into that field, and invite my heart and my whole being to be inspired and to be moved in this moment. For this is a healing opportunity. In that field of understanding, in that field of insight, there is wisdom. And so I listen, I contemplate, and I understand. In the silence. May I be lifted up this day as I move forward to connect with all of life, to find a unity and purpose with all. I celebrate the harmony and oneness of all creation, from within to without. And in all that I think, say, and do, may it be honored by this truth that guides and brings inspiration to my experiences. So be it. Thank you, loving presence, for the unity of all life and the connection of all creation.